Here in the room is myself, Alderman Savage, and Alderman Gay should be here virtually, but we are having a technical issue that will be addressed in a minute. Okay, well, he's on here, but we don't see him. There he is. All right, cool. And Alderman Gay via Zoom. All right, so first and foremost, before we begin, I am going to amend the agenda by switching O3324 and ID 2325 so that we hear the economic development update first. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
I see Alderman Gay trying to go second, but his audio is not working, so I will go second. And all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All right, up next is approval of our March 19th meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
I will excellent. All those in favor? Aye. All right, up first, ID 2325. Ms. Stewart, please step forward.
Hi, I am Hope Stewart, Small Minority Business Enterprise Liaison in the Office of Economic Development, Planning, and Zoning. So you all have received my update. So you've seen, with the vacancy rate, we're still holding steady. It's still pretty low compared to the national average. But a few new businesses open, so we're excited about that. Other updates, Alderman Gay will be glad to know that we're working with the law office to finalize a grant agreement to give $75,000 to the Inclusive Ventures program, which is being run by Anne Arundel Economic Development Corporation. It's a really great program, and I hope we'll be able to have more Annapolis businesses participate. The Office of Planning and Zoning is working through some permit issues to get some businesses open downtown on Main Street, Maryland Avenue, and some others. So we're on top of that. There will be a ribbon cutting tomorrow for Vintage Vibe Finds at 40 Hudson Street. It's at 10:30 if anybody wants to attend. There was a ribbon cutting on April 5th for Blowfish Pokey down on City Dock, and that is where I had dinner tonight. It's delicious, so everybody should go. We are still waiting to hear whether there will be a City Council work session for the Small Maritime Business Work Group. We presented at the Rules Committee on April 4th, and this will be about the recommendations prepared by Seth Lehner, who is a member of that work group. So, any questions, I'm happy to answer from anybody.
All right. I am going to first offer the floor to Alderman Gay, especially since that grant for the small minority business outreach was a brainchild of yours. Do you have any questions on that or anything else from your presentation?
Just two quick points. First of all, I'm obviously thrilled that this is making its way through law. That's when I seen that email, I was ecstatic. I would like at some point to just do a quick follow up with you all, and also I believe it's Amy that's over at Inclusive Ventures, or she is at. Is it economic development that is oversees their Inclusive Ventures program?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Just so that we can all be on the same page, that would be great. And then secondly, in the original amendment, we had money set aside for like a kickoff to talk about economic development and bring in a guest speaker and all of this stuff. And so I want to stick to that as well. And it was attached to this fiscal year, I believe. And so definitely need to use that before the summer is over. And so I will CC you on an email with finance so we can figure that out if that's appropriate.
Okay, and let me know what you have in mind, what you're envisioning, and we can work together maybe with Anne Arundel Economic Development Corporation too to make it happen. They have a really wonderful staff and they're very knowledgeable. And they also have the small business administration advisors there.
Fantastic. I really appreciate this again.
And I just want to say regarding this grant and also the money that we've put toward the maritime trades apprenticeship program, a lot of times people come to me and they don't always seem to understand what economic development is, but these two programs are really profound and will be deeply impactful programs. So I really appreciate the support on these.
Excellent. Alderman Savage, do you have any questions?
Well, let's see. Well, I guess I'm curious. I don't know if you may not be ready to talk about this, or the director, but or the chair. But at some point, it'd be nice to hear your perspective on budget. Like, are there any specific updates from your office as far as what's in the proposed budget? Is there anything else program-wise that you might want to discuss associated with that?
So literally right before the meeting started, Ms. Stewart and I were discussing continuing investing in the Maritime Trades Apprenticeship Program. We finally loosened up and got the initial $50,000 that we put in 1 or 2 years ago. We got the program ironed out off the ground. With Mr. Rice stepping away, I asked Ms. Stewart to look into how much money we have to play with. Do we do another $50,000? Do we maybe look at another or a larger investment? She's going to take a look at what funds we have to play with for a potential amendment that don't increase our budget overall, and see what we can do. But Ms. Stewart, would you mind telling the committee and the public what you said regarding this program's importance to the maritime industry?
I really want this program to continue yearly, because from what we've learned from maritime businesses, and there's challenges that our maritime industry faces, but the number one need and the thing that will make us a biggest attraction to maritime businesses is to have a strong workforce. It's a challenge up and down the East Coast. It's challenges everywhere. When people name cities that we're competing against, they have the same problems. So if we can really be a center of employment for the maritime industry, that will bring the businesses.
And so for those types of program costs within Economic Development Division, do you have your own budget for those kind of, like if you need to go out and get a study or fund those particular programs, or is that grouped into the money in the planning and zoning department?
I think that would be planning and zoning. My budget alone is pretty bare bones. So when something does come up, we usually need to get an amendment of some sort or find it elsewhere in planning and zoning.
Okay.
But again, with staffing changes this year, finding the money for that and an amendment should be pretty easy. After Ms. Stewart takes a look at this tomorrow or Friday, we'll at least talk offline, or maybe at our next meeting, about what I would like to be, if not my amendment alone, a group economic matters amendment to keep this program going, because I'm very excited about the potential of this. Offers a lot of great benefits, not only for our city residents, but for our businesses.
And one of the best things about our business community is that we have really strong business groups. We've got the SOFO group, we've got Maryland Avenue and State Circle Business Association. So if we ever did have money, I would like to put it into supporting these groups more, trying to figure out how we can find ways to strengthen them and, really promote their programs, because they do wonderful things in all of our different areas.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly worthwhile. And but just general question though, is your office still short-staffed?
It's a staff of me so far.
Yeah,
I mean,
but is the vacant position being advertised?
It has been advertised, yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's a difficult situation for that position right now, seeing as we're a few months out of a election, and it is an appointed position. So.
Oh, it is?
It is, yes. It's not a civil servant position. So those are all considerations that need to go into the staffing if somebody comes aboard.
Okay. I wonder why it's appointed, because that's the only position in plan and zoning besides the director that's appointed, right?
Yeah, it's a discussion that we've had, and we're hoping to continue the discussion. So,
yeah. All right. Well, all right. Maybe we keep that in mind for the budget, because I do think All right, we can have that conversation another time. Yeah.
I definitely have thoughts, but that's
Yeah.
when do I not have thoughts? So, yes.
So I would like to discuss some of the permitting issues
Mhm.
that you mentioned, getting businesses downtown. And I'm happy you brought up Blowfish, the
Mhm.
new poke place that just opened up. They had I guess by downtown business standards, a relatively smooth process, but 8 months to get a restaurant off the ground is hard.
Mhm.
I worked in restaurants for years, front of house, back of house, and I know it's a very low margin industry. It's a tight industry. It's a stressful industry. And permitting issues and process issues really add a heartache to entrepreneurs trying their best to invest in our downtown area. Oh, thank you. You can wait until I'm done. But I'll get to you after this, Alderman Getty. So what are some of these other businesses and what are some of these permitting issues that are coming forward in the downtown area?
Would you like to join as well? In my experience, all permitting processes are complex and complicated. Our website isn't always the easiest to try to find answers. I mean, I think that was a problem with a recent business that opened. They thought that they could continue without a permit just based on what they found on our website. And then they received a stop work order because they were doing things without a permit that was required. And a lot of times what I try to do as a liaison between the permitting office and our businesses is just try to make sense of it. They know what they're doing, they know what they're saying, but it's not always in language that a new business can understand. They have so many other pressures on them at that time, financial, trying to open, contractors. So I think one of the things that we can do is really, make this process more understandable. And we've been talking about trying to demystify it. And we have had some meetings internally about what we can do to sort of streamline the process or make it easier for our businesses.
This was not the venue that I wanted to roll this out at, but we do intend to roll out a small business permitting innovation package that we've been working on and been testing internally for quite some time now. John Manassa runs the inspections and permitting division of the planning department. And you might know that we also hired another building plans reviewer. So we have 2 building plans reviewers. And that has freed up time for us to sit down and think and reflect on what it takes internally to make the permitting process easier for the unique needs of businesses. And Hope has described the importance of communication and expectations up front. And in that vein, one thing we're doing is establishing what makes for a complete application. So someone knows ahead of time what's necessary to comply with the code requirements so that they submit an application that can be reviewed. Currently, or up to now, those applications may pass into the permitting process and only to be found upon review several weeks later not to be complete or to be inadequate. And so revisions are requested. Revisions become costly and time consuming, which adds to the complexity of the process. We want to catch that up front. So that's one thing we're doing. And we're also in a very, and I don't want to get into the weeds too far, but one thing we're doing is streamlining what a small business has to do when they move into space that has already been occupied. So adaptively reusing a historic building doesn't require necessarily a full architectural code analysis. And that's a term of art that really says an architect is going to charge me a lot and take a lot of time to get the permit approval I need. We don't need that type of analysis for every application, but it requires us to be more thoughtful upfront to discern what needs a code analysis and what needs just a serious review. And so we're going through that process now. Our new architectural plans reviewer actually proposed a checklist that is going through the process now of reviewing a streamlined checklist. And that will have immediate dividends for maybe half of the small businesses that are seeking applications to move into spaces. So that's another type of innovation we're doing. But we want to roll this out as part of a package to signal and communicate to the business community that we're taking a different tact to move permits through the process. And this is not just in historic downtown. These issues are complicated. And by the way, I should say that these codes that the city has to administer are not always simply city codes. It's not as if we are, or you as the council, the city's council historically has always adopted complicated codes that are difficult to implement. We have to implement federal codes and state codes. State law and federal law have to come through our plan reviewers. These are very complicated. They're intertwined. If one thing runs amiss, responding to that changes a number of other things, so it's a cascading effect. So what we need is kind of an ambassador within our office to navigate through the process. And that's the kind of thing we're working on. I've actually taken the initiative to be in contact frequently with brokers and business people as they're getting the permit process, just checking in on them. Where are you? Hope is doing that increasingly now too. So we're trying to take a different approach entirely. But we want to roll this out in a more systematic way fairly soon. I've discussed this with the mayor actually just Tuesday this week. So be on the lookout, and we'll come to this committee for your consideration of it.
And I should add, so my family owned a few restaurants, and when they learned I was going to work for the city, for them, I was like, I was joining the dark side. But the good thing is that it's, many of us, I mean, people who've worked for private architecture firms, we've been able to see both sides of the story, and that makes it easier to help in this process that Chris was outlining.
I'm very excited to hear that. Something that Baltimore is doing is they're doing this very big relaunch and streamlining permitting processes, doing a big advertising. I hope we can this ironed out do what we don't make a big advertising. Something that's brought forward, and I don't know if it's under consideration, but it's been suggested is really Zoom office hours, so people can go over plans, procedures, just getting in touch with someone, get into the office. You don't have to commit here, but I do. It's not. Do we have a general timeline on permitting package?
You mean as I've described here?
Yes, sir.
I would say probably 30 days to 45 days, something like that. It's not as if we're creating a computer system and we have to run a beta, but I do want to make sure we've assessed things and learned from the experience of recent applicants before we commit to certain changes. And we're testing things out continually, so fairly soon.
And we do have Zoom office hours in a way. We have the pre-application meetings that take place over Zoom. I think we have every Wednesdays, at least 2 or 3 Wednesdays a month.
It's exciting here. Alderman Gay, do you still have questions, sir?
Yeah, can you hear me fine?
Yes, sir.
This is why Director Jakubiak is my top 3 favorite directors in the city, because you just get it and you're constantly thinking ahead of the council and taking in consideration what we need, and particularly bringing in, technology and, making it easier for the businesses. You literally took the words out of my brain, what I was thinking when you mentioned allowing businesses in the historic district to repurpose existing spaces. I mean, the buildings are, 200 years old. You can only do so much with them. And I think, if the office allows, certain packages, like, okay, these are 4 set out designs that, this building can fit. That gives you a leg up as an applicant when you're applying, as you mentioned. It saves you money and all of those things. I think that's so important, because I really do I hope that one day we can beat the rap of being bad for business. How much are you taking AI into consideration? I'm wondering, in particular, you mentioned that sometimes you'll look at applications and 4 weeks later you'll realize that there may have been a mistake, or not you personally, but just in the system.
Wow. I don't know that we take AI into consideration at all. I don't think it factors into the review process. We're not automated in that way. We have, the EnerGov system, which is candidly quite cumbersome just for the staff as well as for the applicants. But that's simply a tracking system. It's input based. It's not sophisticated at any level like that. I think there are probably programs out there that are a little more sophisticated, allows for quicker reviews and better communication among the people on the platform. But we're not there yet with this system that we've inherited here in planning and zoning.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm definitely interested in, working with IT in the upcoming budget to see how they expand AI for all of our departments to use and be more efficient, because it can be, when used right, a powerful tool. Lastly, just to the point that Ms. Stewart had made, I would love to get some of those business groups in one of these meetings so that we can hear directly from the businesses as to, some of the issues that they may be having on the Forest Drive corridor and Eastport, et cetera. And I didn't know that I remember the previous director being appointed, so I do recall it being an appointed process, but I didn't realize that is what was holding us up. And I think that's critically important, considering this office is only 2 people. And so I hope this committee would push for, either a change there or getting somebody in. I just think that's really important.
Just to be clear, the position is exempt. It's an exempt position, but that's not what's holding it up. What's holding it up is just me and not being able to get through all the applications. We've got quite a few applications. We structured it so it remains open and applications can come in until it's filled. And we're going to be, Hope and I have already discussed the interview panel, and we'll be doing interviews probably within 3 weeks, and hope to have someone on certainly by June. That's certainly by the end of June, by the end of the fiscal year, we'd like to have this position filled. But we want to make a good choice. We've incidentally been recently flooded with applications from people who've worked in federal government agencies and federal contractors in economics. And I've simply paused to reflect on all the applications. We've got 400 pages of applications and materials that support candidates' applications. So that's a good thing. But we're getting there. I'm working my way through it as I have time.
Alderman Savage, anything else, sir? All right. I have one last thing for Ms. Stewart. We had a gentleman here. I believe he's the new president of the Downtown Annapolis Partnership. He was here on Monday talking about the holiday market. And he talked about the tracking system and data. If you have his contact information, I would love to have him come here at our next meeting to discuss that and general foot traffic information in downtown Annapolis.
Is this the Placer AI?
The
Placer AI information that they use, I think.
I suppose so.
Yeah, we've been discussing that throughout the city. I know there's a lot of interest in it. We're trying to figure out the best place for it to live so the city as a whole can benefit from it.
No.
We think that there are a lot of departments. We think transportation, we think OEM. But yeah, we can bring him in.
I'd love to have him here
Yeah.
just to even talk about days when downtown is most popular and all these other things, and anything we can do to be useful, that downtown is the economic hub of our city. So
Okay.
hearing no other questions on the economic presentation, Ms. Stewart, thank you so much for joining us tonight. All right, up next in a shockingly slow meeting by our usual standards, 03324, appeals process for property development in Annapolis. Director Kubiak, we appreciate you joining us here today. This is a complicated piece of legislation. Alderwoman Finlayson, the primary sponsor, is not here tonight. She is in Wisconsin. I am a co-sponsor, but I am personally excited for it. And where I am coming from is we have an issue trying to get through desperately needed projects, whether it's infrastructure or housing, because they get caught in frivolous appeals, frivolous lawsuits that we know don't have very much merit, but the stay is just delay. They had time, they had cost. And even if we win in the end, the folks who still file these frivolous cases and lawsuits still get their way, because that can shake off other people wanting to build things and add value to our city. That said, this is a complicated piece of legislation. So, Director Kubiak, I understand that you worked a lot with Alderwoman Finlayson in developing this. So if you wouldn't mind going over the gist of the legislation, I will have committee members ask questions on it. We will get into Amendment 1 presented in the Rules Committee, and then Alderman Savage sent forward to us a couple of hours ago a potential proposed amendment of his own, and we can discuss that.
Okay.
All right, so Director Kubiak, sir.
Thank you. So just to be clear, it was the law office that worked most extensively to shape the legislation. And then when I had it, I saw it as an opportunity to incorporate a number of other improvements to the appeals process. But on the matter of stays and clarifying that a stay is not automatic, a stay to circuit court is not automatic. And now that's expressly stated within the code. That came from the law office. That's grounded in the advice of the city attorney and assistant city attorneys. But the aspect of this that I contributed most significantly to was the aspect related to the Board of Zoning Appeals, the Board of Appeals. But in a nutshell, this legislation says that whenever an appeal of a planning commission decision or an HPC decision or a Board of Appeals decision is made, as you know, that appeal goes to circuit court. There's no debate about that. That's the law, and that's the way it is. But it has been customary, apparently, here in Annapolis, to essentially stay or stop any proceedings related to that approval when the appeal goes to circuit court. But when appeals go to circuit court, what in effect happens is that the appellants can petition the judge to impose a stay or mandate a stay. So the judge makes a reasoned decision to see if it's legally warranted. And if so, the judge can hear the appeal and impose a stay on things. And a stay, by the way, stays the actions of the planning department, for instance, in permitting any development, but also stays the applicant from constructing the building or demolishing the building or using the property or whatever the case may be, whatever the approval may have been. So the bulk of this legislation simply says, in each case where appeals are discussed throughout the code, it says, and I'll just quote because I think it's worth saying, an appeal filed pursuant to this section does not stay the action from which the appeal is taken unless provided by state law or an order entered by a court of competent jurisdiction. So if the state law says, for instance, anything that's appealed from the planning commission to circuit court automatically stays, well, then we are consistent with state law. But things don't stop automatically. It's up to the appellants to go to the judge and say, we're going to request that you stay any further action or stop it. With respect to our local appeals process, when the planning director makes a decision and he messes up and is an error and people want to appeal, it goes to the building or goes to the Board of Appeals. That appeal is heard by the Board of Appeals, and as soon as an appeal is stayed or as soon as an appeal is filed, everything stayed automatically. That's in state law. So my decision, when it's appealed, results in an automatic stay. And that's not changing. We're not changing that because we can't change it. Maybe even if we wanted to. It's in state law, in the land use article of state law. So these sets of changes only affect appeals of the Planning Commission's decision, HBC, or the Board of Appeals, when those appeals go to circuit court. They leave our jurisdiction and go to a higher level of court, and that court can decide if a stay is warranted or not our local code, okay, or our customs. So that's what this does in the main. One element of the change, though, addresses the Board of Appeals. And I say Board of Appeals, and I mean the Board of Zoning Appeals here, not as opposed to the Building Board of Appeals. So on page page 4 of 7 of O3324, I, in coordinating with the law office, suggested a number of changes that I believe will lead to more efficient decision-making at the Board of Appeals. And by that, I mean appellants will get their appeals heard quicker. People whose projects are being appealed will have their issues resolved sooner. And if I can just give you one indication of how long it takes, there was an appeal filed in July of 2024. It was not heard in the main. It wasn't heard as the hearing wasn't conducted on the matter until March of this year, 2025. So the person who's being appealed has had to basically stop his construction. The house is just remaining there. The neighbors who appealed had to wait for an extensive period of time to get a hearing before the board. And there are a number of reasons for that. They're quite complicated, but these text amendments are designed to get a speedier resolution, and so that decisions can be made in a quicker way, and at less expense to both the appellant and the person and the applicant. So, item B1 says notice and hearing, and there's an A that says a hearing shall be conducted expeditiously to determine the facts, apply the criteria of the code.
What page are you on?
Page 4 of 7.
Can you share the line, sir?
Oh.
Can you share the line?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, line 9.
Thank you.
So if work our way from line 9 to 12, that's crossed out. And then Cynthia has a new A, B, and C, or A, B, C, and D. And so A now says a hearing shall be conducted expeditiously to determine the facts and decide the case, decide the appeal. The Board of Appeals shall select a reasonable time and place for an appeal hearing. That's existing language, but not later than 45 days from the date of the appeal filing. In other words, within 45 days of receiving the appeal, the board has to hold a hearing on the matter, not on establishing your record or giving opportunity for the parties to argue about what should be in the record or not. You come to the hearing and make make your case in front of the Board of Appeals so the board can render a decision. The parties to the appeal shall be heard in person at the hearing and shall not be required to file or respond to legal briefs. So this cuts down substantially on the costs where applicants have had to, the appellants have had to write a legal brief, hire an attorney, write a brief. The entity being appealed, in this case the city, has to do a responsive brief, which involves a lot of staff time and a lot of time on part of the city attorney's office. And then notice of the hearing shall be given in accordance with requirements set forth, and that's not changed. That's standard stuff. But so these really three of the items are new, are meant to get to a more speedier disposition of cases. I may have not you may not know this, but I served on the Annapolis Board of Appeals in the early 2000s for 4.5 years. We heard the cases the night they were presented and decided them, wrote our opinions, got them approved, and moved forward. We didn't extend decision making over multiple months. Sometimes hearings had to go over because testimony was presented and the like, but it's important to, I think, move fairly quickly with appeals. One thing that we changed here was to essentially define what on the record means. So in line 29 on page 4, the hearing of the Board of Appeals shall be on the record. That's what it currently says. And then we added comma, meaning the record shall comprise the information available to the director at the time the decision being appealed was made, which is an attempt to make it clear about what exactly is the record, so that there's less legal argument over what constitutes the record. The record is the evidence that the board will use to make a decision. And essentially, council members will know that when you go through a permitting process, a whole series of documents get built, plans, staff notes, calculations, permits, various orders that might be issued. All that gets consolidated, and all of that constitutes the record. So these multiple documents get sent to the Board of Appeals and say, okay, we all have the same information now. Let's schedule a hearing and make a decision. And I believe that's, I think I've essentially covered, I've covered everything here, the some substantive parts of this code change.
All right. I'm going to go to Alderman Savage if he has any questions, then Alderman Gay, and then I'll ask questions. Alderman Savage.
Yes. I believe we received some testimony from the Board of Appeals that they were concerned about the language on page 4, line 17, about that the Board of Appeals shall select a reasonable time and place for the appeal hearing no later than 45 days from the date of the appeal filing. Or at the board's immediate next regular hearing date following. So are you saying that they actually have to schedule the hearing within 45 days, or they have to meet and schedule something within 45 days?
Ideally, they meet within 45 days. If they can't meet that because the agenda's set or something like that, then it's the immediate next meeting. What this does is elevate appeals to move them through the process quicker. So it may mean that the next hearing, items that are variances or special exceptions may need to step off the agenda so we can hear an appeal. In practice, that's what it may mean, because there are times when the Board of Appeals gets very busy.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but quite often.
Because I think their point was that, the agenda is somewhat set by the department, right? By the director, by you?
Yeah, I think so.
So you're saying that shouldn't be an issue because you can bump some of the other non-appeals so that they can have time. I mean, I really don't know what their backlog is for appeals. Is there going to be could this present an issue? Because I know for some cases, for some of the more serious appeals, they have dragged on multiple meetings, right? I think maybe Eastport Shopping Center. There are some others I know that took multiple meetings, so I could see that hitting up against that 45 days is because they're just occupied with something else. So what would you do in that kind of situation? With this language, it sounds like they would have to. They don't have that much flexibility.
one reason why that case that you referred to had multiple meetings uh, uh, or multiple hearings is because there was a lot of preliminary hearings to discuss the record and make various stipulations. The same thing happened with the earlier case I was referring to in Eastport, where the appeal was filed in July, but the actual hearing on the facts didn't happen until March of this year. But that's not to say that nothing happened. There were multiple meetings of attorneys meeting to debate things. That is unheard of in the work that I've done over many decades in Maryland. You have the record, you come to the Board of Appeals, the hearing is open, and the case starts. And then the case itself may take multiple cases. The board might say, okay, we're going to devote an hour and a half to this hearing tonight. If it takes longer to get through it, we'll reconvene, but we're going to keep the hearing open. We'll continue it to the next hearing. But in any case, a lot of them are cases that can be dispatched with fairly quickly. And this gets that on the agenda. If there's a space on the agenda immediately, it gets right on. If it can't get on that agenda, it has a space on the next meeting agenda.
Well, my computer's having an issue. But I guess I kind of want to provide some more flexibility. And so, for example, if you're looking at on line 18, for example, at the very end, we could just put a comma and say, or as indicated by the director, or as determined by the director, right? Which would at least give you the flexibility of, okay, if they do have some significant backlog of some huge project and they can't meet the 45 days, that would give you the ability to say, okay, because of their schedule, I'm going to have to give them an exemption to do it in 60 days or whatever, right? But that they'd still be beholden to the 4 or 5 days unless you stated otherwise. But I kind of like that because it gives us a little check valve in case it's ever needed.
Yeah, I see that.
And I think that might give the board some assurance that because they are volunteers, right? So if per chance they just have a crazy schedule, let's give them flexibility.
You're right. It's probably a good idea to have some flexibility. To be fair, the board said two things with respect to this section. One is that the time period shouldn't start until the director submits the record, rather than the appeal being established.
Right.
So,
and that's addressed later with Alderman Finlayson's amendment.
No, hers is dealing with something else, actually. Yeah, unless she's got another amendment, but her first amendment is related to timing, but not particularly to that paragraph. But the chairman the board is saying, if the director takes a lot of time getting the record to us, that's cutting into our 45 days, right? And I think that can be a problem, but it's not a problem anymore because we know what the record is now. It's clear what the record is. It's all the documents that were available at the time the decision was made. And we have those documents consolidated. So I think we've resolved that particular issue.
Okay.
We can go right to a hearing now with the documents. And there shouldn't be any deliberation or contesting of the record. The record is what it is. But what we've had is the board giving opportunities for the appellants to argue about the record. Well, the record is what the record is. And there's nothing to argue about in that case when all the documents are, in fact, in the record. When it was before this definitional change, the record was sort of open for interpretation. And you're basically asking the director who's being appealed to supply the information to the board that it should use to make a decision. Well, you can see how that can cause argumentation between the parties. But I think we fixed that with this term. So I think it's easy to get to the record now. It's easy to get to a hearing. And the 45 days really signals our intent to move appeals through the process to a hearing quicker.
So I guess, Mr. Chair, would you, and to the rest of the committee, Would you be supportive of putting that kind of check valve at the end, just to be line 18 after following, put a comma and say, or, let's see, no later put a comment and say, or by a date determined
page?
by the director.
What page?
It'd be page 4, line 18.
Director Kubiak, do you think that keeps in spirit with the legislation and would not cause increased delay?
It could if the director weren't acting appropriately, but if the director is being a good actor here and eager to get the appeal settled, I think it'd be fine. I mean, but it does provide some balancing of scheduling, so it's a reasonable type of amendment. If a future director decided, I don't want to be, I don't want to have to confront this appeal of my decision, I'm going to keep postponing this. Well, that's obviously a problem. It's in itself, and a court could direct the director to comply with the standard. So I'm always a little leery about giving a director too much authority, but I see what you're saying here, and the intent is to move this quicker, but you might say by a date determined by the direction where scheduling conflicts have presented themselves, or the Board of Appeals is required to meet monthly. It has an agenda, and we do have alternate members to supply a quorum. So, yeah.
So saying, or by a date determined by the director in the case of scheduling backlog or scheduling challenges. I mean, I guess the first question is if the committee thinks it's worthwhile. If not, I'll moot point.
So something we had discussed in the rules hearing was finding a way to provide a little bit of extra time. But a proposed amendment was voted down because it left things vague. Something I was amendable to was expanding the 45 to 60 because it was more time, but still gave a hard, you got to get it done. Because in something like this, predictability and hard deadlines are good.
I hear that, and I kind of agree with that in principle, that the idea that predictability is good and hard deadlines, especially for appeals. It should be said that in the chairman's letter too, he also said, or it was the Board of Appeals that sent that letter, basically our rules of procedure provide that it's first come, first serve. First application gets on the agenda. So this would effectively require a change to the rules of procedure. This trumps the rules of procedure, of course, because this is codified into law. But the rules of procedure now provide that we just take first one in and go through the process like that. But I think appeals do require and should require us to make a place on the agenda whenever we can in a reasonable time. So if it's 60 days, that's fair. At least it's a date certain, and it gets us to a decision-making hearing. And that's the key, not to get us to a preliminary hearing to discuss evidence or discuss how we want to meet or how we want to share evidence or how the attorneys should talk to each other. No, get it to a hearing so the appellants have a chance to persuade the board of their questions, and the city has a chance to defend its decision or agree with the decision, and the applicant has a chance to put evidence on. That's what's most important.
And why I liked the 60-day number is it gives the 2 meetings to get this done.
Yeah.
Because you got a committee or a commission required to meet every month. 60 days is approximately 2 months. You got 2 meetings to knock it out. Are you comfortable with that more flexible timeline while also giving like a hard stop point?
Yeah. I mean, I think 60 days. Yeah, I think that's better. I'm still a little concerned because I know if we have a really difficult appeal, complicated appeal, it might drag on. But I guess this would, I don't know. The only other out would be they would have to come to the council, and we could certainly give some kind of a waiver to the code if they really needed more time for some reason. That's why I was trying to just figure out a quick way for the director to do that if it ever became an issue. But again, maybe I'm just overthinking it. But it's because I know we've had some complicated things in the past.
It's generally not hard to get something on the agenda within 60 days. And sometimes things are not settled at that first hearing, but a hearing can open up and the process can begin, certainly.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. It doesn't say it has to be resolved within 45 days,
Right.
just that it needs to get an initial meeting, initial appeal.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
the
that's
hearing
true.
is held. It could potentially be settled.
Yeah.
And candidly, sometimes with an appeal scheduled and on the horizon, it sometimes compels the appellants to actually sit down with the city and vice versa to work things out too. It's a date certain. Okay, do we want to? And sometimes it could lead to decision making away from the table so that appeals become mute.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So never mind, Mr. Chair. That addressed my concern. But one other last question is that, because I'll save the conversation about it on the record when my amendment comes up. But the other question would be: is there a deadline for when they have to get their written decision for staff? Because I know that's.
I don't know that.
Is that also? I mean, I haven't noticed it with this board, but I haven't paid super close attention. But I know with the Building Board of Appeals, they've sometimes taken months to get a written decision for a case that. Yeah. So I think I could see that being another choke point if that's what your goal is, to keep things moving, is to say a deadline of like they should get a written decision within 30 days of the final of the hearing or something.
I would say that on that question, the Annapolis Board of Appeals is 100% competent and moves quickly, without reservation. I say that they put together opinions quickly and circulate them and get them through and back into so they can make a decision. There's no question about it. Like that was never even a subject of that rose to any concern for us to even suggest a change to this. So
Is that
I don't think it's warranted.
Is that addressed in their proceeding or their procedures? I mean,
it may be addressed within the rules of procedure for the Board of Appeals, but I just don't know.
Okay. I mean, I'm glad they're working well, but I'm saying we have had a problem with the other appeals board. So if we have members on, or I don't know who the attorney is on that board, but
we have a different attorney now with representing the board of the Building Board of Appeals who comes to the meeting. So that will likely improve things because the expectation there is you make a decision, you got to set it forth in writing, findings of fact, and circulate it among the members and publish it. So I'm hopeful that that issue is resolved.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I have not seen it. Even the planning commissions, whose decisions can be quite complicated and lengthy, works really well to get the decisions done. And this is not a universal achievement. Throughout Maryland, and I know that is always the place where things slow down. Just getting that opinion published can take a long time. But that's not the case here in the city.
Okay.
Except for the instance that except for the matter you're raising.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing in the code to prevent that from happening. But I'll leave that up to the chair because I know I think, are you one of the sponsors?
I am, yes. All right. So I'm going to pass it to Alderman Gay before I get to my point, and then we can discuss amendments and potential amendments. Alderman Gay.
Thank you. I just, first want to say, I don't think that we should allow extraordinary situations to dictate legislation, meaning the Eastport Shopping Center, or any other development project that is just, dragged on for 5 years. That is something out of the ordinary, I believe. And just based off of what the director said, there's always, something just beneath the surface. And in this case, he mentioned the preliminary hearings. I remember they had so many community meetings, just that thing dragged out unnecessarily long. I'm glad that you just struck down the proposed amendment for 60 days, because the thing I wrote down on page 4 of 7 was to amend it to 30 days. And the purpose that I recommended that is because, again, the urgency in some of the projects, and when you're appealing this, if you're investing money in a project, as the director mentioned at the beginning, and it has to sit for 45 or 60 days, you're losing money every single day. And what if you just don't have it? What if it's your first opportunity, to build a home, or you're, getting money from an inheritance or something? And I think, to allow these, scheduling conflicts, etc., to drag out and potentially harm an applicant, we should take into consideration. I think based off what the director said, 45 days, it's in the middle. It works for everybody. And so I'll move forward from there. My only amendment suggestion would be on page 4 of 7. It says, or on page 4 of 7, under review procedures, bullet C, parties to the appeal shall be heard in person. And I think there should be an option for virtual meeting in there. You don't know the circumstances. And when you put something in the code, it's by the code. And so, we may box in the parties, and something could be out of their circumstances. So I think we should allow for virtual sessions in there.
Director Jakubiak, is there anything in the code that currently allows appeals to be heard virtually? Is this something that we can add in now? Is that just because virtual hearings are relatively new, we didn't think of it?
Yeah, the word virtual never made it into the zoning ordinance. I doubt it's anywhere in the code. But I don't know that we need to add it to the code. I think we can address the Alderman's concern, which is actually the concern of the Board of Appeals too, that we can simply say parties to the appeal shall be heard to eliminate in person at the hearing. The key is that they be heard rather than be represented simply in legal briefs.
So
that they have the opportunity to address the board, present their case verbally to the board, as opposed to writing legal briefs.
So that would be.
So I would eliminate the word in person after the word heard.
So add line 19, remove in person. Page 4, line 19. Yeah. All right. So we'll vote on that later. But I am putting that in a note now, Alderman. So that's page 4, line 19, removing in person. Okay.
I did have one last question. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind.
Please, this is a complicated bill. We want to make sure everyone is clear, gets their knowledge on it.
On page 5 of 7, notices or record of decision. The Director of Planning and Zoning shall maintain records of all actions of the Board of Appeals relative to appeals taken pursuant to this section. What is that in reference to? And who was maintaining records previously? They're amending in the director.
So this is not new language. This is what exists now, and it just says that the planning department has to keep the record of the appeal, and that means all the evidence that was presented at the case, as well as the decision that was made by the Board of Appeals. We also keep the the audio version of the hearing. So all the matters that go to the Board of Appeals are kept as part of the official record. And why that's relevant, Alderman, is that if the appeal is then made to circuit court, there's a repository for it. Everyone can go to that place and say, okay, there's the official record. It's being maintained by the city.
Okay, I appreciate it. I was confused there because it's in red, and so
Oh, right.
I didn't know if it was adding or something like that. So I appreciate that.
Okay.
So, anything further, Alderman? Hearing none. So, Director Kubiak, I appreciate your very detailed breakdown of this legislation. Talking to the primary sponsor, one of the reasons that she had brought this forward is she had mentioned there are several specific housing developments and projects that had been caught in appeals that were very delayed. However, in conversations with a builder, they had said that there's a potential that this could also be used against builders, where if they wish to appeal a project that goes against them. Do you see that it could stop them? Do you see that as a potential side effect of this or unintended consequence? Or
Actually, I see it as a benefit to anybody that is being appealed. You're saying that they might appeal a denial.
let's
For
say
instance.
there's an affordable housing project that
Yeah.
wants to go downtown.
Right.
And the HPC commission rules against it,
Okay.
and they wish to appeal that. Would this make it harder for that to happen, hypothetically speaking?
No, no, not at all. I mean, if it's appealing the HPC decision, it's simply, it just simply doesn't stay. It's not stayed automatically. The person appealing the decision will go to circuit court to get the authorization to stay, if that's what that person wants to do. If you're doing a project and you've been denied by an administrative body, you're going to appeal it to circuit court. Stay really doesn't matter to you, right? I mean, so because you can't do it if you're denied. So I don't think it affects an applicant that has been denied. They certainly retain the right to appeal, and they can appeal. And if anything, on balance, this would help get to a speedier resolution of appeals. But again, I don't think that this language affects them. Now, you might think the thought exercise: what happens if the Department of Planning and Zoning, in its administrative capacity, denies an application? And maybe it's smaller, like a house or something, where we have authority to approve a new house, or minor site design plan. If we deny it, they can appeal to the Board of Appeals and say that the director erred in denying my application. And again, the thing is stayed automatically, but if they're denied, they can't go forward anyway, because the department would place a stop work order on the project. You can't move forward with construction that has not been permitted. So it's really has no material impact as far as I can tell. What the benefit is, though, is that it gets them to the decision-making hearing much faster, which any applicant who's been denied will want to do, to have their day in court as soon as possible, so to speak.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
That's really the main question that I had. I will again say I do think this legislation has the potential to streamline a lot of really wonderful projects, big and small. And regarding what something Alderman Gay said earlier, regarding the 45 versus 60, every day is something money. There's been a project that I know a friend of mine's been trying to just do a house rebuild. It's been delayed to these types of appeals for a very long time. He's, I think, very justified, frustrated, losing a lot of money in that waiting time. So I totally understand. So unless any of my colleagues have further questions on the legislation as written, I would like to get into documented amendments and potential amendments. So we have one documented amendment from the Rules Committee on page 6 in line 7, insert after the insert last. So as this would go is the Board of Appeals shall reach a decision within 40 days from the date of the last hearing. The rationale of this is after the hearings have been concluded, after the hearings have been concluded, they wanted to clarify that they wanted the decision to be made 40 days after the final hearing and not 40 days after the first hearing. Everybody thought this was reasonable. I will say if an amendment has both Ross Arnett and Brooke Schandelmeyer supporting it, that's kind of all you need to know. Although Director Kubiak does have an opinion, so I think that is worth hearing.
He raises his hand
Timidly
timidly.
to counter the Brooks and Ross team up.
It's a very rare.
So let me put it this way. What this does by putting the word last is it enshrines the notion that there are multiple hearings. I'm trying to convey to you in the city that we don't need multiple hearings on an appeal. We want things to be pro se, which means friendly to the public. The average person can come get their case heard. There's only one appeal and there's only one hearing. The hearing may continue from meeting to meeting if it's necessary, but they're not multiple hearings. There are multiple hearings when a Board of Appeals decides to convene the attorneys to argue about evidence and procedures and process over periods of time, months and months. But that's what this is designed to eliminate. So I think if I had an opportunity to speak with Alderwoman Finlayson, I would explain that to her. I don't know if it would be persuasive, but I hope it's persuasive with you. We have one hearing, and within 40 days of closing that hearing, even if it's a multiple night hearing, a decision should be forthcoming in a reasonable amount of time. And that 40 days is what the current code provides.
So I do find that persuasive. I wish you had been able to explain that to us during the actual hearing in Rules earlier in the month.
Yeah, I couldn't be there.
How often do appeals process go into multiple hearings? And Alderman Gay, I did see you put your hand up, and I will call on you next, sir. And then Alderman Savage.
Well, I've not been involved in many appeals here in Annapolis. Because the appeals are on the record, they can be fairly quick because the evidence is known. The documentation is provided. We're not creating new evidence. We're not putting on new witnesses. So they should generally move fairly quickly and be decided in a quick period of time. It may be that because of scheduling and the busy agenda of the Board of Appeals, they can only devote a certain period of time to a case in a given night. In that case, it could roll over. Lastly, appeals to the Board of Appeals are generally rare, believe it or not. They're not a very frequent occurrence. And to the extent possible, we try to resolve things before they go through the appeals process. So I have, in other jurisdictions, have seen appeals go over multiple periods of time, but largely that's because they were de novo and required experts to be placed on the agenda and start the process over again. And I think Annapolis actually had that process in place some time ago before it went to fully on the record.
So what you're saying is the major delay then is the actual scheduling of the hearing, not once the hearing starts itself.
The major delay seems to be getting the parties in the room in front of the Board of Appeals so the board can decide things. The major delay has been preliminary discussions, deliberations, drafting legal briefs, rebutting legal briefs, considering legal briefs, deciding how legal briefs should be written and when they should be filed, these types of things. That makes it very difficult for the average person to participate in the appeals process. And we want to make the appeals process at the board level more friendly. As citizens, we have an opportunity to appeal and to defend ourselves and for the city itself to present matters in front of the Board of Appeals. So
I think that clarifies an awful lot for me. Alderman Gay, and then we will go to Alderman Savage.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to actually be speak in opposition of this because when I've read it, I'm like, well, wait, this is like 85 days. If they have 45 days to schedule the initial meeting, and then they can postpone a decision for 40 days. So I'm glad to hear that. My question then to what you stated in the change. Oh, geez, I forget when that happens. Because I was thinking about the. Let me pull up the amendment again really quickly. Sorry.
Would you like us to come back to you, or?
Yeah. Just come back to me, and because I took a note on the on this amendment.
Alderman Savage.
I mean, I see your point, but I'm still concerned that the way it's worded, and again, I know it's a rare circumstance, I suppose, to have multiple hearings, but again, it's happened, and I think we want to make sure we don't have unintended consequences that potentially put the board in a tough situation. I can kind of see, I don't know, this could put them in a bind, but I also see at the same time, 40 days from the last hearing potentially gives them more potential for time for delay. So I don't know. So I'm not quite sure. But I also want to say that the amendment technically has an error. It states page 6, line 7, but it should be page 5, line 3.
Ms. Jackson, could we reach out to the law office to make sure that gets corrected?
Yeah, just double check that. I think that's the case. And I think, is this another one that came from the Board of Appeals?
no, this is the language that currently exists, and the Alderwoman Finlayson added the word last in front of the word hearing. So this wasn't changed. The statement of the Board of Appeals shall reach its decision within 40 days. That's always been in the code. That's not being changed here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for
Did you
clarification,
rely on
this
that?
was a rules amendment, not a specific to Alderwoman Finlayson.
Okay.
I
Oh,
believe
okay.
Alderman.
I'm sorry. Yes.
believe Alderman Arnett was the primary driver, if I am remembering this correctly, and both Alderman Finlayson and I agreed to it.
I just want to reinforce that there's one hearing that the Board of Appeals holds on a case, and that hearing could last multiple nights, but it's just continued. They're not separate hearings.
Yeah.
Separate hearing means you have to do different notice, separate notice, separate public involvement, or separate public notification, and that's not what we're talking about here. It's just one hearing, and our goal is to have the board meet once to hear the matter, not multiple times on preliminary legal matters. We want to make it easier for someone to come have their appeal heard in a reasonable period of time.
But I think it's legally debatable because the hearing you could interpret to mean day 1, 2, 3, because it's all essentially one hearing. It could be considered all one hearing because it's on the same case, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I'll just.
And that's how
withdraw
it's
my
been.
concerns.
Yeah, that's how it's been understood now.
So then, just for my clarification, and then Alderman Gay, it looks like Alderman Savage, you mind if I jump in just for my
Oh, I'm done.
clarification?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm done.
Just so my clarification, it doesn't matter if this hearing goes for multiple days. So let's say Board of Appeals meets on May 1st, June 1st, July 1st, and it's talking about the appeal of Brooks tearing down his house and building a giant tower that's shaped like him. It doesn't matter that goes 3 specific days. That's all hearing 1.
Right. That's just one hearing. Matter is continued over multiple days.
Okay, so
And that's why the way it was drafted originally is accurate and shows up in municipal codes routinely.
The amendment's needed.
so the amendment is unnecessary. Thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
Alderman Gay?
Thank you. So we'll withdraw it, or regardless, I'm still gonna vote no. But I want to know if your definition of hearing needs to be added somewhere um, in the code or in this legislation, or is it already? Because if law drafted this amendment and the rules committee requested it, somebody obviously didn't know what the definition of hearing means. And so that needs to be clarified moving forward, so that just in case you are not the director, somebody comes along and they interpret it different. Am I making something out of nothing? I hope.
Well, I might suggest that whoever drafted the amendment was being responsive to the Rules Committee's deliberations and providing them what they asked for. But again, this language has always been in the code. That the word "last" has never been in there, and it's always signaled that there's a hearing on a matter and it continues. But certainly, I can even go back to the law office to get clarification on this if the board would like, or the committee would like. But I can assure you that it's just one hearing. By saying last hearing implies there's multiple hearings. We don't want multiple hearings on cases. We want one hearing, and the way the code was originally made out to be. I think over time, the practice has developed to make the appeals process far more sophisticated, lengthy, and difficult, and it has real bearing on the average person who's appealing a case or who's defending against a case. And by the way, it makes it very expensive and time-consuming for city staff and the law office to be engaged in these lengthy, 10-month-long appeal processes.
So just lastly, do we need to then? I'm just worried about. I guess if the amendment is being pulled, it doesn't really matter. I was just really concerned about, the possibility. For example, is there a timeline set within the code of how long continuation must be scheduled? For example, if the hearing starts on a Monday, January 1st, is it required that the next meeting be held by January the 5th, so that there's sufficient, time for information to be accurately dispersed, but also so that the property owner or developer is not being required to wait until the next Board of Appeals meeting, which would be 30 days, correct?
Yeah. So what in practice happens is when the hearing reaches a late hour, for instance, and it's getting late and the board members are ready to call it quits, a chairman will say, looks like we're not going to be able to finish this tonight. Let's collectively decide on another date and continue the hearing to that date. And they decide right there, all parties, what the date will be. And all parties have to find that it's acceptable. And right there on the record, on the public record during the hearing, they say the matter will be continued until, and they specify the date. They may say until a date to be confirmed by the director and brought back to all parties, and we'll publish it. But they have to establish that then, and all parties have to be involved in that and find it acceptable. I suppose there might be instances where someone could be aggrieved by a lengthy continuance that basically removes the momentum that they had in presenting their case. But I think that's beyond what's reasonable, and it's never happened in my experience. It's usually a date set right there among the board members and the parties at a time that's expedient. It can happen as soon as possible, usually within 30 days.
Alderman Schandelmeyer, please don't kill me. I know you like to run a tight meeting, but just one more.
There is a difference between an inefficient meeting and a detailed meeting on a complicated piece of legislation, and I think this is the latter.
Thank you. I am. Is it possible, or have you seen examples of? And I think we've talked about this previously, where if you just have a single family home or a duplex that you want to build, can the appeals process be expedited in such that we say this has to be rectified within 30 days? However, a major development plan, can fall under the standard Board of Appeal process. Well, like for example, I sat in on a Board of Appeals meeting one time, and I couldn't wrap my mind around why this sweet couple had to come and get an attorney and spend time, and this was their second time back at the meeting, to add a screened-in porch to their house. So how do you defeat that?
Well,
And that's my last question, I promise.
okay, yeah. I don't think we can defeat it in the ordinance that we have tonight. I think it's within the code itself. In the case that you're referring to, in cases like that, they're typically because there are variances, and someone is seeking a variance or a modification to the strict code to allow them to do something that's otherwise prohibited. So if you wanted to reduce the amount of variances, you would change the code to make these sort of de minimis, sort of minor type of appeals case or variance cases less likely. And I'm all for that as a general rule, to scour the code and figure out, and we can look through the code and find out all the repetitive type of variance requests and say, can we live with essentially what the Board of Appeals is approving anyway, right? In fact, many municipalities have that in their code. If the board finds that it's continuing to approve variances, the same type of variances, it should report to the city council that a zoning text amendment should be processed and approved. Our code doesn't have that, and I'm glad, because I think that puts too much pressure on the board. But that's our job as the planning department, to catch these things and say, well, is it really reasonable to make people go through this thing and they customarily get it? It's a simple minor variance. So generally, as a rule of thumb, if we have situations like that and we can live with the consequences of slight variations, then we can make the code more flexible for people. So, but again, that's something that's not in front of us tonight. That's a bigger question.
Anything further, Alderman?
No, I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I think you had very good questions. Alderman Savage, do you have anything else on Amendment 1?
No,
All right.
sir.
So, since this is a rules amendment, and I think it was done out of lack of understanding, I do think it is important that we as Economic Matters, since I think we have a better understanding of the legislation, due in part to Director Kubiak's presence here, I personally think it would be best for us to make a unfavorable recommendation for it. I would like to have it explained why, but if you could actually be here when this comes to final reader, I think that would be very good, because I don't want this to be an attack on the members of the Rules Committee, including myself. That's mostly for my own ego. But I think that would be very helpful clearing up what a hearing means and the timeline of that. So do I have a motion for an unfavorable recommendation on Amendment 1? The
So
Rules
moved.
Amendment? Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And Ms. Jackson, if you can please note in the record that hearing does not mean multiple days. The hearing can go multiple days. Thank you. So, Alderman Savage, you sent to the committee, I don't know if you included Director Kubiak on your email.
No, I did not think of it. at
Here,
the
you
time.
can
I
have my-
apologize.
You can have my physical copy, and I will use the online.
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
Excellent. Cool. No need then. So, Alderman Savage, you introduced a potential amendment. I would like to have that discussed, and then we can go into Alderman Gay's potential amendment on the page 4.
Okay.
So, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so just to get the basics out of the way, just to make sure we're all on the same page, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director, but so all on the record is the review. It's limited to the existing record of findings from the initial staff approval or whatever is being appealed. And those kind of appeals focus on procedural legal correctness. De novo is where it's a fresh review. So new evidence is allowed, re-examination, right? And so the shortcomings of on the record approach, which is currently in the code, I believe it used to be de novo, but I think I forget when it was changed. It may have been more than 8 years ago. I think it was the previous council. But in any case, I'm going to go through some of the shortcomings of both approaches, right? The shortcomings of on the record are you've limited evidence consideration because you can't introduce new information even if it's completely relevant. So that leaves the potential for procedural errors to persist. If you're only looking at the existing record, you have lack of flexibility, and also a kind of perception from the public that it's rigid and prevents reevaluation of complex issues. Because I have seen, I've seen some appeals where I think there are instances where it's important to offer corrections when there are errors in the record or new information that has come out that need to get discussed. So I think those are some of the shortcomings of that approach. For de novo, the issue with that, I think what the sponsor probably cares about most in this instance is it couldn't include a delay, right? It can be time consuming because you have to go through the whole entire brand new record, brand new review. So it can be resource intensive, higher legal costs, and just a burden to the appeal board. And so what I am kind of proposing here is more of a hybrid model, which my understanding is something that's done in Queen Anne's County, but also I've listed cities like Boston, New York City, Austin, which have incorporate more of a hybrid model. And so what the hybrid model does is it combines elements of on the record and de novo, so it allows for more of a balanced process. So it does preserve efficiency by relying on existing records, but also enables the introduction of new evidence to address factual disputes when necessary. And so some potential scenarios would be if you've got a property development project that faces an appeal, the hybrid model can ensure that procedural errors or legal misinterpretations are reviewed on the record, while factual disputes like accuracy of a traffic study or compliance with the building code or something can be examined de novo. Or in like a historic preservation case where the hybrid model can balance the need to respect original findings with flexibility to introduce new evidence, such as new documentation of a property's historical significance or something along those lines. So that's just so that's what I'm trying to get at, is to allow some flexibility and not bog it down. So you'll see in the proposed language, and I fully admit this is something I have not yet had a chance to send to staff for review or law office. It's just that's why it's not really a formal amendment at the moment, but I did want to get thoughts. And so as it's written, you'll have some instances where it says all factual matters would be treated de novo. So new evidence could be considered, new arguments, testimony, as if no prior decision has been rendered. But when you're looking at applicable laws, ordinances, regulations, the board should give deference to the original decision-making body. And so, yeah, so that's kind of where I'm coming from with this. I don't know, Director, if you're familiar with this approach, or think it's a bad idea, a good idea. But I know I'm springing this on you, but
Yeah.
It just occurred to me recently.
I've heard of this, but I don't have real experience with it, except to say that I've been in cases where they're held on the record,
Mhm.
but the chair has or the board has provided some flexibility to hear evidence that was relevant, and both parties kind of participated in formulating.
Mhm.
In other words, they didn't put blinders on in an obtuse way. But I will say that the de novo part of this, which focuses on the fact finding, is essentially opening it up, because everything that is decided is contestable on the facts. Was the square footage of that room or that building X? Was the height this? Was the yard this? Was the traffic impacts this? Is the quality of the stormwater flowing off the site X, Y, and Z? So everything can be contested. So what you will see is much lengthier hearings, because not in every case, but in the more complicated cases, because the attorneys will go through the entire record and put their experts on, because it's all facts. It's all fact-based, and they have to build a record now because it's de novo. So they can't avoid the opportunity. They're compelled on behalf of their client, and because the case will go on appeal to next level, the record of this de novo hearing will be essentially important. So it will essentially be, okay, thank you, planning director, for making a decision. Now we'll make the decision ourselves. And then the board is essentially the fact finder and the decider. And so I don't know that in practice it's really a hybrid model. I think effectively it becomes de novo, just because there's not much time spent on the law or precedent. These things really are settled on the facts. There's no disputing. And if the code says 3,250 square feet, or is the max, or the setback shall be this, then it is. I mean, that's what the code says. So I think first, but I'll also say that I think something like this would benefit from the members of the Board of Zoning Appeals here reviewing it. We have really good experts on that, top-notch Board of Appeals compared to any jurisdiction I've been involved in. I think they could really dig into this and think through the implications and advise the city council on it. And of course, the law office too.
Yeah.
But this is just my kind of gut reaction from experience. I would fear that the hearings would devolve into fact-finding, expert witness testimony,
Yeah.
and we would lose sort of the momentum we're creating in terms of making things more streamlined.
Yeah, I see your point. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to balance it, but maybe, because I could see, and I'll try to be brief with this, but I do see that. I see your point, but I think there are some situations where, for example, with environmental impact, there could be brand new evidence that wasn't considered on the record, right? And I don't know. I guess at this point, I'll take your advice and instinct on that, and I think maybe I will run it by the board and the law office just to see if they think this is not a good idea. Because I certainly don't want to bog down any of the boards. I just
Right.
I've seen some appeals go through where I just don't want the rigidity of on the record to prevent what could be a common sense addition to new information from being considered. But I don't know. I don't quite know the best way to do that right now.
And maybe the answer is that maybe some language is put in the code or in the rules of procedure. Maybe the rules of procedure is better, that the board would agree to, that would say that the board may consider items of fact that are contested at the board's discretion. Because while these are official hearings, there's also an element of informality about it. This is not a literal court of law. It's quasi-judicial. So some of the strict rules fall by the wayside in order to get at a better decision. and a lot of that is just the art of administering the process. So who knows? Maybe the board concludes that we have the authority to do essentially this within the way we practice. Maybe we just need to share more broadly that we're open to considering factual discussions where it's relevant to our decision. That's I think something the board can weigh in on with the law office's involvement.
So, Alderman Gay, I believe you had some questions on this.
Just one very, very quick for the sake of time. Alderman, I thought this is very interesting. I'm just reading through it, and I appreciate you, being willing to bring this new idea forward. I was going to say the same thing as the director. I'm wondering if you should send it to the board, get their opinion, and have them write an opinion back to us on what they think. My only question is, how is the current on the record style? You said it's limited to existing documentation. I just want clarification on that. Outside documentation can be submitted, correct?
Well, it's on the record means it's the record or the information that the board bases its decision on comprises all the documents that the director or the department had in its possession when it made the decision. Basically, you're getting at what could and should the director have relied on when the director made the decision, and that information is part of the project file, and it might be some other data too. It might be a report that the director said, I looked at this report, and this report showed me the following things, and based on that information, I rendered this decision. Well, that report then would be part of the record.
Thank you for that. I may have interpreted this wrong. I thought the example that you showed, Alderman, was stating that our current process was actually limiting the director's or the chair's access to information. So I apologize.
So I just want to get a little more clarification on what new information is allowed to be heard in these hearings. So you did say there is some flexibility and informality on what the Board of Appeals allows to be heard in this process, correct?
I said, in my experience, I've seen that, but not here in Annapolis yet. We haven't seen that yet, but I've seen that in other jurisdictions. And I said that these are quasi-judicial hearings, and sometimes there's an informality that allows a board to explore certain factual information. But that's up to the culture and how a board conducts its hearings.
All right, so let's go back to my silly example from earlier where I want to tear down my house and build a giant statue of myself to live in. Let's say that gets through in the initial process, but then it's discovered that this entire statue was fueled by a tiny nuclear reactor that will be dumping nuclear waste into my neighbor's backyard. That's new information. Could that be heard at the appeal?
Well, probably would be heard because the appellants would have a hard time refraining from describing that. And they could say that the director should have known that that was a nuclear reactor site, right?
Let's do a less ridiculous scenario now. Let's say in a tear down rebuild of a single family home, it turns out that a fence that I would like to build goes into a little bit of a critical area that we missed. Would that be admissible?
Yeah, that's right. It would be
Okay.
because that a critical area map would be a document that the director would have had available at the time, and failing to apply that standard in the code and with that information would have, under your scenario, would have been a mistake.
So we are allowed, in the case of these mistakes where things slip through the cracks, which can happen, that new information is allowed even if we don't adopt the hybrid model or
In that
adopt-
case, there's not necessarily new information, but that's relevant information that's this part of the testimony. And the applicants or the appellants get to present their case, and they can say it's clear that was in the critical area,
Perhaps I'm misunderstanding what new information is.
New information. It's not de novo. Is not just new information. It's the evaluation of the information too anew, right? In other words, you're saying as board members on a de novo hearing, I may come to a different interpretation had I reviewed the same information. So it's not always new information. It's the presentation of the information over with a new analysis or new deciders, right? So the board becomes the decision-making body looking at the information that's the director used, but also any additional new information. So for instance, a traffic study may be conducted. Maybe a traffic study wasn't required as part of the approval process, but the appellants come to the board and say, well, we've done a traffic study. We think that this should not have been approved because now we have information that we would like you to consider. Nothing required the director to do a traffic study, required the applicant to do a traffic study, and the director approved the project. But now the applicants or the appellants are coming to the table and saying, the director really made a mistake because he should have known there was a lot of traffic. And we've done a traffic study now. We want to present it to the board to persuade you that the director made a mistake. That's new information. That's an example of new data.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Sure. That really ironed out a lot of misunderstandings that I had. Alderman Savage, I saw you had your hand up.
Just a quick, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of too many examples, but just to help me understand, I would ask you about one scenario. Like if in a situation where someone gets approval to build a shed on their property, right? And it gets approved because according to what was submitted, it's on their property. But after it gets approved, the neighbor says, actually, no, the property line's incorrect. And, they have proof of their record plat or they have their own survey that shows, the property lines are actually here and that shed's on the neighbor's property. If it's on the record, my understanding is they won't be able to present that new survey that actually shows it's not the staff made a bad decision per se. They just didn't have all the information when they made the decision. So would they be able to introduce that new?
It sounds like the applicants or the appellants might be able to persuade the board that the director didn't rely on factual information, or relied on poorly prepared information, or didn't rely on an official survey, or accepted something less than a survey. We've discussed that before. So that's not new information. That can be dealt with in a on the record hearing, because well, leave it at that. It's
okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of moving parts with this that we're still learning some more from. I understand you'd want to submit this to law and potentially get opinions of the Board of Appeals. So I see no reason to take a stance on this. We'll let you iron out what you want to do on this. And we can postpone action on the legislation for this hearing and just make a final call on it at our next hearing. Our next proposed amendment is very simple, which is my favorite amendment. On page 4, line 19, remove in person. So this is what Alderman Gay brought forward, where as we move into a more flexible in-person versus virtual hearing, we want to provide that little bit of flexibility where if the board wants to meet virtually or an applicant can only meet via Google Meet, Zoom, Teams, whatever future options are provided. I don't know.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
if you don't mind, I'd like to read I have a 60-page report on the benefits of virtual meetings.
I will not allow that in my efficient meeting. We blew past my target of 30 minutes, bud. So, Alderman Gay, but was that what you wanted to? Was that what you had in mind for doing on your amendment to allow that flexibility?
Absolutely, and I appreciate the director for making that recommendation instead of adding virtual or whatever. Just remove that, and as long as it says hearing, it allows for discretion of the body.
Hold on. Parties shall be heard at the
Yes.
hearing. Yep. Okay, so in person is all that needs to get removed. Okay, so for clarification again for everybody, on page 4, line 19, we are removing in person. So that is the motion for the Economic Matters Amendment number 2. Do I have a second on that?
A second.
All right, it has been first by me, seconded by, we'll just say Alderman Savage. I heard him first. All those in favor of the Economic Matters Amendment? Aye.
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 Excellent. Passes unanimously. So while we try to wait for potential on your amendment, Alderman Savage, I understand you might have another piece, another idea. I'm content with waiting one more hearing on voting on this while you try to figure out what you want to do on that front. So I think it's appropriate to postpone this into action on this until our next hearing. And then I want to get this out, ready or not, in our May meeting. So can I get a motion to postpone action on this until the May hearing of Economic Matters?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
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 All right. Director Kubiak, if I could please ask you to join us at our May hearing. Hopefully it'll be a lot faster. I hyped us up as being really fast, and we had almost 2 hours. But, hopefully it was productive for you as well.
Thank you. I like the invitation.
Excellent.
I'm happy to be there.
So do I have... there is nothing else on the agenda. So unless there is anything else for the good of the order? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Good.
Second.
All those in favor of adjournment? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you,
Aye.
everyone.
See you all.